So I want to right now admit from a wonderful new social media venture. They're on Twitter, but it's also a Facebook group, a fast-growing Facebook group, which is great to see, called United for East Palestine, a great sort of mutual aid network that is forming online. We are here with two of the admin slash moderators forces behind that group. We have Alex, Felix, and Jenna Giannios. I hope I got your last name right, Jenna. Was that right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, beautiful. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate you guys coming on. We've been trying to cover the East Palestine disaster as best we can and as often as we can on the show. I said as soon as this happened, this is the kind of thing that independent media has to stay on, because if we don't, nobody will. And it's great to see a Facebook group form for this mutual aid purpose, because as much as we all, I'm sure, are familiar with how social media can sort of be a vessel for our angers and our hatreds and our resentments and our frustrations, it's nice to see social media can also be a vessel for empathy and compassion, love, and solidarity, which is what you guys are doing. So do you guys want to talk first about who you are and where you're from? Jenna, I understand you live fairly close to the affected town. And then Alex, you're from Vegas, correct? You guys can go in whichever order you'd like.
Yeah, so I live in Boardman, Ohio, which I'm about 12 miles out from the derailment site specifically. The Facebook group we created initially, I think before we really knew what was actually going on. People were being evacuated. They needed some resources. We wanted to make sure they had clean water. That was kind of where it all started, and it grew more rapidly than I could have ever expected. I thought maybe we'd get a good 300 people, and now we're at, I think we're over 8,000 members from across the country, which has been really cool. It's actually how I met Alex. So Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I just sort of wound up on the page because I'm a solidarity member with United for the Railroad Workers United, and I get their newsletter. So I found out about this pretty early on, and I was just interested in trying to help with organizing, mutual aid. And so I reached out on the Facebook group, and that's how Emily and Jenna and I met, and we kind of formed a team and just have been working with really awesome people like Professor Andrew Welton from Purdue University, Aaron Bragg, big ups to Aaron Bragg, who lives in the area too, has a property of 500 feet away from the derailment site. Dr. Beatrice Galam, who is a very highly respected medical researcher. She was one of the kind of like the main scientists who proved the the United States' culpability in Gulf War illness and how they were causing that to happen in soldiers during the Gulf War. And she reached out to sort of mainline the medical research on this, all on a volunteer basis. One of the big things we're doing now is trying to raise funding for these ventures. Just an example, Professor Welton came to East Palestine for a day and a half, took some samples, and then the second half of his team came the next weekend, and they're $25,000 in the hole now. So, there's a bad need for funding to get this done, and it's important that it does because within days of him posting that he was doing that, the EPA finally released they were going to have Norfolk Southern test for dioxins, and they released a statement telling people to the creeks literally the day after Professor Welton said that he was there and documented that he was there and told them that they needed to. So there is a lot of power in having these types of people with, real credentials and real respect in that academic community being able to do this, and they can do that if they have the funding to do so.
Yeah, and on top of that, it just seems like people are able to communicate with each other, organize and promote town halls in the area. I just saw a post earlier about a naturopathic wellness center having a health and wellness workshop that people can go to there, sort of, promoting that on the group. Information about how you can get dioxins tested in your home, information about water bottles. I saw, picture of a van full of water bottles being sent into town where people can go and get access to that. So it's just, it's a fantastic resource. My wife is she's part of a lot of, traffic and weather groups locally where people alert themselves to different things. That's one of the things that Facebook can be a great tool for. So it is really this great sort of mutual aid community for people who live in the area. But then, like you said, when it comes to fundraising efforts and things like that, anybody can join from anywhere and make a big difference by going on there. So, I mean, I encourage everybody who's on Facebook to absolutely join that group. The link is in the description of the video.
And that's what's really important about efforts like this. We've been having, speaking of Marion, we've been having a big conversation in the online left about nihilism versus political electioneering and whether it's an either or choice. And this is an example of what you can do, of actually getting involved in a cause outside of electoral politics. Whether you want to get involved in electoral politics, that's up to you. That's a separate thing. But without this, that is kind of meaningless, I would say, without these efforts.
It's a super important thing. And so, you know, do you know roughly, I mean, it's tough to track exactly, but do you know how many people from the East Palestine area are involved in the group and how much sort of on the ground work is happening as a result of this? Because it seems pretty active to me on the page. Yeah.
I know, I'm not sure how many people from the group are in the area. I think it would be kind of hard to tell. Or maybe we have a few data scientists, maybe they can decipher it somehow. But I think we have a pretty big following from the area because it's been an area that hasn't gotten a lot of attention. Most of the aid that's been provided has been from outside the area. So like trucks from Pennsylvania, like everywhere across the country have like shipped. There were Amazon wish lists and stuff. And we've been partnering with some of the local nonprofits that are in the area to provide distribution for a lot of these goods since, like I said earlier, we didn't realize how big it would become and how much of a fight it would become for the residents that are there. I know I live 12 miles away and you would think nothing happened. Or people think I'm crazy for wanting to help. They're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, like in reality, it impacts all of us because dioxins don't just stay in a 1 mile radius or, and the water doesn't just stay in that area. Our entire community is impacted, but also, that area, like they have dire need right now. There are people that are sick. They need help. They need relocated permanently. They can't go back to their homes. So I think like that's where we've been focused on getting the right testing, getting in contact with the right people that can help make some real change, whether it's extending the voluntary evacuation area that's there right now. It's about a mile radius. And giving them the proper tests. We have people waiting weeks to have their wells tested, like weeks. So in the meantime, they're either buying their own bottled water. Hopefully they're coming to grab some. It's like there's people that don't have cars, think of your grandmother, like having to go get cartons of water. It's really unfortunate that people have to deal with this, all because it's about profits of a train company, because God forbid they would not go through there, they would lose money. So
what do we know about toxins on the ground? What do we know? Do we have real lab results of what the area's toxicity is?
I'll let Alex take that one.
So we have Professor Weldon has put out some preliminary results. We've also gotten some preliminary results from a few other labs that we weren't specifically working with, so the veracity of them is kind of hard to tell. But we do have a lot of reports saying that the chemicals that we know there are dioxins. We have lab results demonstrating that those results that there's like basically every kind of type of dioxin that exists is in the water and the soil. We know that the test the EPA took. Now the problem with the test Norfolk Southern took and the EPA is touting as proving that things are safe, which is happening from a perspective of one being very flawed for where it was tested, what they tested wasn't like anybody's home or the soil or soot on their cars. What they tested was the debris from the landfill that they had put into this dump site from the train derailment site, and they tested that, outside with like no transparency, like no real, no eyes on them of how they're testing their methodology, etc. But even that test, it showed that every type of dioxin is there. They say within the safe levels, but when they mean when they say the levels that are according to the CDC and the CDC, the CDC will allow at a dump site, not in a residence, not where someone lives,
right.
a dump site, which is different. They don't talk about any of that. So there was just a lot of skullduggery in regards to how things are happening on that side. But Professor Welton his team has put out preliminary results. They haven't finished testing for dioxins because those tests are much more expensive, like thousands of dollars per sample. But we do know that what he has been able to prove is that the test panels that they were doing for these tests, one of the reasons they were so flawed is because what they were doing was they were just kind of testing for like a random spectrum of chemicals with no like rhyme or reason. And so Professor Welton on his Twitter, which I highly recommend you follow, the Welton group on Twitter, what he showed is that they were, because they were just testing for random chemicals and saying, well, we have this and this, there's no rhyme or reason. So his central position is, in order to do this, what you have to do is test for literally everything first, right, at the sites where we know there's contamination. And then once you have an idea of what chemicals to look for, then you test for those chemicals. And that's what they haven't been doing. So, and what he did was he did a kind of what he called a kitchen sink test, which is testing for literally everything. He's put out some preliminary results showing that there are very dangerous chemicals and very dangerous high amounts that were not shown on the chemicals pattern that was put out by the EPA and Norfolk Southern because they weren't testing for them. And so one of his big positions is we have to test for everything first, and then once we know what to look for, then we can look for those.
Yeah, and then you can trace the amounts if they stay the same, if they go down. Obviously, that's a very time-intensive process, and the way you are describing it makes it sound like that costs quite a bit of money as well. So it's a long haul kind of thing, and that brings me to my next question here, which is you guys have obviously been involved in this firsthand, since the crash happened. We've been doing our best to cover it as closely as we can since it happened, but I noticed in the first couple of weeks since the crash, the information came to me. I didn't have to look very far. And now I can see, just 6 weeks later, it's more of a struggle to find information about this, to find news about this, to find coverage about this. And these are where, like, these weeks here are critical, because this is where it's no longer front page news, but you can't let it fall out of the cycle entirely. So how have you guys seen this covered in media? And how big an obstacle has that been to growing the group? Obviously, you guys have already grown it beyond where you thought it would. Is it slowing down? Is it picking up? Are people choosing to engage in this way, despite the fact that it's sort of falling out of front page news or top story on? Well, it was actually never really top story on CNN, but now that it is not as hot a topic anymore, is that becoming an obstacle, or do you, in your experience, are people remaining engaged and actually increasing their level of awareness?
From the Facebook group perspective, it's dwindled quite a bit. We were gaining like 500 followers or members a day, and now that's what we're averaging a week. From like a relief effort, I probably get one person every 3 days that's asking to donate something, and directing them of where to donate. So it's definite versus like I was overwhelmed and didn't know what to do with anything. There were, I would say, about 3 weeks out, we got a whole week of really good press coverage from national news. I think I was on Fox, CNN, News Nation, something else. I don't know, multiple places. Like I was like so overwhelmed with interviews. And now it's nobody's reached out at all. Like it's just been independent media that's been covering it. And I think that's really thanks to, people like you. Alex reaches out to a lot of independent media as well, based upon some of the shows he listens to. somebody commented it's still a big local story. I think it's local to like that specific area. I don't think it's covering the surrounding communities at all. So it's definitely fallen off, but we still are getting a steady following, just not quite as big as we probably need it to be.
Yeah, I know, because I noticed, like, I saw a couple of posts of, like, there's a family in Cincinnati that has a trailer that can house a couple families worth of people, and so they'll post that, so if people need a place to stay, if they can't stay at their home and they can't afford a hotel, they can go. And so, like, that's an area where, yeah, obviously, it's most relevant to people who live in the area, and obviously the closer you are to the town itself, the more impacted you are by it. But there's ways for people to get involved and help, from all over the place, whether it's donations or even if you live a few hours out of town, if you have space that you can put a family up who needs it, that's a huge help. I mean, that could be a lifeline. I mean, we saw a video of the town hall that guy, saying, I got a family of 5, crammed onto whatever it was. I think his brother-in-law's bed or something like that, because people just have no place to go.
Was there any reaction there to Joy Behar blaming the residents for the way they vote?
Yeah. I mean, a lot. Yeah. I mean, that town, it seems. I mean, my assumption, and I don't know, Alex, if you want to chime in, seems to be a pretty heavy Trump supporting town, and we know Joy is not. And so, for some reason, she seems to blame that vote on Biden's response. I don't know how that really correlates. Each person has an opportunity to change regulations if they disagree, right? And we haven't seen that happen. So whose vote is it?
He had 2 years to do.
And it's a people problem. It's bipartisan. It has nothing to do with like how it's being made into some political circus in general. Everybody wants to blame somebody else, but in reality, Norfolk Southern supports both political parties.
Right.
So they can deregulate the crap out of things and make profit. So.
And we just had Biden shut down a railroad strike.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to that point, a couple of points I just wanted to address. The one point in terms of getting people offering their homes to people, one that's super generous. We have we have a whole pinned post for people offering housing. But the thing is, people need to be evacuated. They do, at the very least, need the option to be evacuated. And I don't mean a 1 mile zone. We have data. It's from an informal survey, and we're a very small team, only what we've been able to gather. But from the data we have pretty steady showings of toxic chemical exposure injury 10 miles out from the derailment site. We have people who have been reporting terrible lung injuries, vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness, migraines, for a long way out. And that's just the acute stuff. And the reality is, a lot of people don't necessarily want to go live in someone's house because there's all kinds of problems that can occur with. I mean, it's great and generous, but if you don't know someone and you're going to those houses, I mean, I'm not discouraging you from doing that, but I'm saying the reality is there's a lot of variables there that a lot of people feel leery about, and they need the option to be able to evacuate safely and in a way that leaves them financially whole, at the very least not worse off than they were before. And that is fundamentally what is not happening. And the reason why it's not happening is because the government is running cover for Norfolk Southern and protecting them from culpability and responsibility for the damage they're doing to people's lives, to their health, and to their financial. When Jenna went on to CNN, they brought a man to the panel who can't even retire now because his home value is worth absolutely nothing now.
Right.
These are the kind of people that Norfolk Southern needs to be paying out. And the main problem is what we found.
They're too busy bailing out SVB.
Yeah, and what we found is that we originally were trying to raise funds to get people evacuated, but what we found is that just it's impossible to raise that much money, at least for us. It would be like millions and millions of dollars just to get started. And what we found is that the fastest route to do that is to prove there's a problem, because that's the biggest thing, is that they're gaslighting everybody about how dangerous this is, what chemicals there are. And that's why they're getting away with not evacuating people. So the only way we can stop that is by getting real, independent, rigorously tested
Right.
Science and data showing that there's a problem, and then by doing that, we can then force the government to then force Norfolk Southern or whoever is responsible to get people out of there. And I think that's the main reason why, or our main goal is to get people out of there. And what we found out is that seems to be the quickest strategy to do so.
Well, that's a hugely important point. It sounds like what you're saying is that denying that there's a problem there and suggesting that it's safe to be there is what is a way of sort of stopping that first domino from falling. Because once you accept that there's a problem, well, now you have to deal with the problem and all of the implications of that problem, which, as you just articulated, there are a few of them, are far more than what initially meet the eye, right? What about home values, right? What about travel expenses for people to leave and come back? What about job losses, right? What about school systems, right? How are the schools going to handle any sort of depopulation if it's permanent? Is there going to be the same demand for teachers? What's going to happen to the teachers if there are no longer, if there are no longer enough people in the town? These are all questions that all stem from acknowledgement that this is not a safe place to be.
It really does illustrate how when average people need something from the government, it's a struggle. And when a bank needs something, wow, man, they were on that lickety split. Wow, what did that take? A day? And they had everybody's deposits covered. I am sure that to bail out this entire town would cost a fraction of what they had to put into bailing out that bank. Mm-hmm. You're talking about billions of dollars. That bank had $208 billion in deposit, most of which was not insured. And they can't bail these people out on their property. They can't bail these
exactly.
people out on
have
their
you guys
houses.
seen any chatter about that? Have people been talking about that?
Because this isn't Midtown Manhattan. I mean, what could the houses cost there?
No, of course.
It like if you look at the community demographics, I think there's like a median income of like $45,000.
Yeah.
There's the percentage of secondary education is in the single digits past high school. So like we're not talking about mansions for the majority that we would have to buy out. They are average homes. They are good working people. They've worked their asses off to have what they have, and the fact that they now have to choose to like keep working and pay off a house that's worth nothing. Like it's just broken. Like that's the American dream now. And if this would have happened in probably any other city major city, the response would have been very different. And yeah, it's broken. In the Silicon Valley Bank presidents or CEOs, like they get fired and Alan Shaw just gets to chill being a millionaire.
Yeah. Well, even the depositors, I mean, we're going to talk about this in our last segment, obviously, but this is where you have the reality set in amongst people, mostly, I shouldn't say mostly, but certainly disproportionately in the middle of the country, the upper Midwest, the Rust Belt, right? Who just feel like there are just two different realities in this country. Like even a lot of people who are having the debate, should we or should we not have bailed out the depositors of SVB, who are, of course, disproportionately, Silicon Valley startups and things like that. When you talk about backing them up and bailing them out, you're talking about sums of money in excess of $250,000 because the first $250,000 is already insured by the FDIC. So you're talking about right before you even have the conversation, you're talking about people who most people in this country, and certainly a vast, vast, vast majority of people in East Palestine, Ohio, would already consider rich before you even start the conversation. We're talking about people's $250,000 and first dollar here. Whereas the idea of having that kind of money in the bank is completely foreign to so many people who are affected by this thing here. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, what country is there? It's not really a country anymore. It's not a civilization anymore. It's not a society anymore.
Well, it's the same with law enforcement. There's really no meaningful enforcement of white collar crime, even though it's usually far more damaging to far more people than the kinds of crimes we do prosecute. Who did more damage? The bankers who wiped out pensions for a generation in 2008, who didn't do a day in jail, or the guy who robs the corner store who's going to do years in prison for that? Who should be in prison?
And speaking of prison, and it's not, this isn't a white collar crime. This is just a felony, a violent felony by any stretch, but it's still being protected because Norfolk Southern. We're looking at violent crime.
Right.
There's so much to look into, and I encourage everybody to go to our Twitter page because we've done a lot of work in kind of showing this out. But we're talking about aggravated arson, which is a felony. We're talking about poisoning, which is a felony. We're talking about conspiracy to conceal a felony, which is a felony. With multiple people talking about people from the CEO of Norfolk Southern, the governor of Ohio, people in the EPA, anybody who has participated and who can be shown to be participating in the actions of covering this up and knowingly doing so is committing a felony. This is not a white collar crime. This is a violent crime. And these are the sort of things that can be prosecuted in criminal court. I think one of the biggest failings that's happening right now is Governor DeWine put out that the AG is pursuing a civil case against him. Okay, fine, but this is not a civil case. Poisoning someone is a felony. That's a crime. That's criminal. That's not just suing them because they pay money. People should go to prison for this. And not that I'm necessarily for the prison system, but if we're going to have any kind of accountability, then people who are participating in actually poisoning people and actually harming people on an industrial scale, we're talking about just people inside the zip code of East Palestine. We're talking that we have people who are reporting credibly showing with like chemical samples they're showing people are getting sick all the way in Ontario, Canada. There were viral videos and that they suppressed them, but there was a large number of videos on TikTok and people in Ontario, Canada showing snow melt with the exact same kind of chemical sheen that we were seeing in rivers and creeks around East Palestine. So this is a level of chemical poisoning on a scale that is not being talked about by anyone because they're suppressing it. And it's a shame that we're not seeing anybody in the media talking about this because we're just a small team, yet we're able to see there's people in Cincinnati, people not Cincinnati, people in Connecticut, people in Ontario, Canada, upstate New York.
My area right here in the Hudson Valley, about 2 weeks after that happened, there was a weird perfume smell in the air. I have a horrible sense of smell, so I didn't smell it. My wife smelled it. She went on to the Hudson Valley weather. They were reporting that people were sensing that, people, itchy eyes, a weird sort of like chemical sort of, they said it smelled like a perfume kind of thing. We don't know. I mean, we're a few hundred miles east of here. Jet stream blows that way. Who knows? Not saying it came from there, but that was on people's mind. Absolutely.
If I could say almost certainly, we actually have High Split, which is a state of the art projection model for dispersion of particulate and showing that we actually have a pretty good idea. I mean, there's a lot more data we can plug in, but you can go to our Twitter and see there's people who have been doing work to show where this went, and that's exactly where it went. And we have, it's not just like anecdotal evidence. We have a vast amount of data, which is one of the reasons for the things we're also trying to fund is because we have a team of people who are very learned in data entry and AI who are capable of actually putting together a model for how these are being distributed. We need to know these things because anybody who has smelled these chemicals is being exposed to them, and we don't even know what chemicals they are. We don't know what sort of acute or long-term injuries can happen from being exposed to these chemicals. We don't even know what chemicals they were exposed to. So there is a huge amount of of science and testing that needs to be done that is not being done, and that's what they want. They want all of the snow to melt. They want all of it to go into the river. They want all of it to break down, so that way they can't prove anything. Because once you can't prove anything, there's no crime. And so it's so important to get this data so we have the evidence, so we can show this isn't just something about them paying out money, which they need to do, obviously, make people whole. This is a crime. This happened on a gigantic scale to the point where it would be considered a war crime if they did it if it was one nation that did it to another nation. That would be a war crime. But because they're doing it to people, and Norfolk Southern is doing it to people, and they're running cover for it, they're doing these things with expectation of receiving absolutely no accountability. And I don't think that's acceptable. I don't care where you sit on political, philosophical, any kind of spectrum. If we, as you said, if we're going to have a functional society, that can't happen.
Right. No, absolutely. 100%. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We put your Twitter handle in the chat here. The link to your Facebook group is in the description. Before you go, any final plugs where people can get in touch, how they can get involved? Because I think it's very important that they do.
Yeah, I mean, I can say we have a bunch of organizations linked, as well as our donor box, right, is for independent science funding. So that will be up on our Facebook page. I don't think it's on there now. We've really pushed it on Twitter and not really there. So we're gonna.
It's on our page, not our group, but it's on there.
Yeah. So it's on Facebook. It's also on Twitter. So that's a really solid way to help if you're not near. If you are near, we've linked a couple nonprofits that are accepting like physical donations as well.
If I can just quickly say also, if you
course.
go to the donor box, you will see a link to a spreadsheet where we have put the budget. So any money that is spent from the fund will be put on the budget for complete transparency, so everybody can see how every dollar is spent.
Beautiful.
Okay, great.
Well, guys, thank you so much. It was great to meet you. We will be in touch for sure. We'd love to talk to you again sometime as well. Jenna and Alex, thank you so much. Great work. And we hope everybody gets involved.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Thank
have
you.
a great night, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Please clap.